My talk today actually comes from more or less over the last 2 years seeing BDD, which is behavior-driven development, being emerging and starting to show up at testing events. But at the same time, I've had nobody ever talk about how does that actually fit together with MBT. And actually, we get that in the field a lot, questions about, hey, how does this fit together, behavior-driven development and model-based testing. So since nobody did any kind of presentations, I started after some point to think maybe I should present something. So about conforming, I don't want to spend a lot of time about this slide here, but you have to understand we don't only work directly with end customers, but we do a lot of work with service providers. And that means also, and we're seeing especially a lot of BDD requirements coming from the clients of test service providers back to us. So it's not even that the testing teams let's say, have a choice, they just have to align. The customer comes to them and says, listen, we will work from now on with BDD and you just work with us now. Okay? That's maybe an interesting motivation that there's no choice. Okay, so how I structured this talk, first a brief motivation, and then you have to know after lunch about a couple of vegetables that always come up in this context of behavioral-driven development. And then I will just very briefly sketch out model-based testing and then show how this is used together. So about, again, still the motivation. So behavior-driven development has been coming around. Actually, its roots are in test-driven development, where basically this was a way how one can easily integrate also the business analysts in the part of the testing process, meaning to write tests before you develop any code. In parallel, we have model-based testing, which in the meantime, over the past, let's say, 10 years, has evolved from a pure test generation technology to enabling functional testers to work with scriptless and integrated end-to-end test automation, and I will show a bit also what that means. So the big question here, as I said in my introduction, the main question here is, well, how do these two things fit together? So before we do that, let's review just for those, who of you has heard about behavioral-driven development and Gherkin? Okay, thank you, that's about half, 2/3. Then who of you is using BDD today? Okay, so that is a bit less than that, so 1/3. Okay, so anyway, for those 2/3, well, 1/3 that has not even heard about it, again, the background is in TDD, and the kind of cornerstone, the good thing about BDD is very easy to understand, especially this big component called Gherkin, which is this pickled cucumber. Right? That's in English word for this vegetable that's pickled is called Gherkin. So part of this Gherkin is a specification language which usually people write more or less, you can look at this as pure text. I will show an example in a moment. And there's like a handful of concepts you use to specify let's say, the intent of a test. You can call it a user story. And basically, you have these prefabricated sentence structures where you need to start with given that something happens. When this happens, then this should happen. Right? And I will show an example about this. I mean, the beauty, I would say, about Gherkin is its real simplicity in terms it does not really require much from tooling or from the people who are using it. In a way, you can, in the extreme case, write whatever you want. But that's at the same time, as I will discuss, also one of its weaknesses. Now, on the other thing, usually when you come to customers and you ask them about, well, what about BDD? And then sometimes people don't know, well, BDD, I don't know, but I've heard about cucumber, and here's the next vegetable, right? But I think we all know what cucumbers looks like. Now, Cucumber is a open source framework, I would call it, which is able to take in these files which follow this Gherkin format and basically produce code stubs out of that. And that's available for various kind of programming languages. By the way, even Gherkin you can have in any language of the world. So they have these syntax files, probably even in Hungarian and Finnish and German and whatever else, right? Okay, so this is here just an artificial example What's not artificial is this actual application, which is a real application. You can, like your this polling tool we're using, you can find that even in your own web browser on your phone. And basically here you can see a feature. This is simple file, right? We can also make more complex files. We can have parameterization in there, actual data tables and all of that stuff. But more or less, the pattern you see is there's a scenario, there's another scenario, and within a feature file, I can list as many scenarios as I want to describe a given functionality. And here now, I'm able to use these given, when, then clauses, even multiple in one. This is just a simple example. Here we have some kind of a repetition to put this together. Where Gherkin doesn't say anything is in the black stuff. The black stuff is just, from Gherkin point of view, pure text. And for example, when I use this in Cucumber, it just produces function stub names from that stuff, okay? So it does not know what it means that the user adds 3 items, okay? That it doesn't know. But it just, it follows, at least, I would call it a semi-formal approach, easy to learn. I'm already talking about the next slide. So what is nice about this is, and at the same time, it's cursed, so to say, is that it is extremely easy to adopt. I mean, everybody can write in their own native language, and you just have a couple of very simple requirements. The thing is, this pure text element, however, is a bit of the challenge that we face in the automation. I mean, again, I'm coming from a background, I want to automate everything. I don't want any manual steps in between. I don't want to refine these function steps. I don't want to write them, right? So here I have a problem with that. Then we have, of course, Gherkin. The benefits of this is kind of this nicer spec we have been dreaming about in testing for a long time, right? I mean, for a long time, testing community has been complaining, oh, bad specs, I cannot write the good tests to write the bad specs. I mean, if our business analyst uses this stuff, this is much better than nothing, right? And again, it's even so we can engage the customer. And that's basically, in a way, you can say your customer's writing tests, outlining tests for you. The same, he's outlining for you acceptance criteria. You know how valuable that is, right? You don't have to guess, well, what is it on 4 legs that my customer actually wants from me, right? So it has tremendous value. I want to also point out that I've worked a long time with Etsy, and actually, I forgot to look up the date, but some years ago, Etsy had also an initiative of a language called TP-LAN, a test purpose language, which actually tried to achieve the same goals. And there's separate publications on this, and I wanted to just reference it. If I compare Gherkin and TP-LAN, Gherkin has the advantage of being even simpler, right? And again, that's his strength. The thing is, obviously, there's other things, like, for example, obviously my tests are only going to be as good as my scenarios, and once I start looking at a kind of scenario-based approach, I'm limiting myself in a way to these things, and maybe also I'm testing less around the other interesting scenarios. And of course, the thing is how to get good Gherkin. Now, I know that in theory, and especially very strong supporters of this Gherkin approach tell me all the time, well, the Gherkin is a decision where the business analyst, the developer, and the tester talk together and they define the vocabulary that they commonly understand. That is the theory part of it, right? In practice, I'm getting feature files where not even one guy whose native language is English, right, is able to reproduce the same kind of functionality in 2 independent test scenarios. So what we have found in looking at Gherkin samples is that consistency and redundancy in Gherkin specifications, even within a single feature file, are already something that needs manual work to ensure, and it becomes even, I would say, a little bit bigger issue once you start to go beyond. Okay. And then BDD gives the developers a direct link to the business analyst or customers. And then we get back to these letters BDD, right? Behavioral-driven development. Is there anything in here that says testing? No, it's about development, right? So it's, again, a movement coming from the unit testing community. And I feel also missing, like, where's the tester in this equation, right? Because functional, let's say functional testers, not unit testing, but more at the functional testing level. So then basically the idea was, well, actually we have developed a technology here which can help involving testers in the automation process. Why can we not try to see how we can effectively combine these two approaches together? So for those of you who don't know model-based testing means that we actually use kind of graphical models these days. I think all the tools are tending towards the graphical models, but that's not the standard. Are used to specify models, and then we generate tests out that are run then against the functionality that's being modeled. There are slight variations as to where the line goes as to what we're actually modeling here between the test and the system operation, but I think, again, we have a number of tools, both in commercial as well as open source space, that fit into this model. Also notice, as we are here in at the HTB event, the ISTQB has recently also been producing a first syllabus for certifying people in model-based testing as a skill for testers. Okay, so the idea is we generate tests, and we generate test data based on targets. And again, the idea also a lot is in the integration with the entire pipeline. So this is what I would say the ideal pipeline looks like. I understand, again, this is from the background also of enterprise IT systems. So we have classically, this test execution, right, which is automated ideally. And then we have our test management systems and requirement management systems in place, some version control. And basically, what we're talking about here is MBT plays a role which actually feeds into the automatic testing execution, delivers the scripts to be executed. And now we're talking about adding actually a way of importing Gherkin into the modeling world. And this is essentially what the first approach is, which is Gherkin as an input to model-based testing. So here the idea is, instead of starting out modeling from scratch, we started with the requirements we get from the customer. In this case, it would be the Gherkin scenarios. So it's part of that also, because it's an automatic activity, we can at the same time perform some analysis. For example, if there's some repetitions in the Gherkin, or if there's other kind of things that can be optimized, repeating of test steps, so then we can already optimize this in the import. And then again, what this allows us also is to kind of validate the overall functionality specified with a number of scenarios in a single graphical model. And then finally, it's up to you if you already want to, in the model, refine these actions, which are pure text, into real interactions with the system. For example, that you have a description, the user adds 3 items to the shopping basket, right? That you say you fill in a form where you indicate the quantity is 3 and the item has the product identifier, and then you click the add to the cart button, right? That would be a refinement of an English sentence, for example, into a real interaction. And then finally, also, you can take your ALM requirements and link them to the flows which have been generated. And this is the core idea here. There's more ideas, for example, as we know, model-based testing has classic benefits in helping, to maintain test sets over time and to also extend them much more easily. So these benefits are available. We can continue the modeling within the modeling tool, and then even generate Gherkin as an output from the model-based testing tool. Yes, and I know this is a lot of text, and most likely many of you are still trying to read it. But what about it just showing it in some figures, right? So here again, I have my Gherkin figure, right? My Gherkin figure, basically what I click in my tool, and now, of course, this is now our tool, but in principle, this is not limited. We are unfortunately not so special. So basically, you can deduct from this using fairly standard techniques, a model which basically combines these scenarios in a flow. And as you can see, actually, even in this case, there's some redundancy in the Gherkin. Those of you who have read carefully may have noticed that actually this successful shopping test is a subset of the test that I have below. I mean, an identical subset. And, by a quick glance, you have just said, oh, the guy wrote 3 scenarios, probably it's all right. Right? But I mean, obviously, here we can use tools to help us to catch these kind of things. And then, from this, again, you can go and refine it for the automation, or you can just kind of do the automation as part of some kind of automation tools. And for me, I think, especially comparing this to the approach that Cucumber takes, I think this is, people facing the challenge that maybe today they have already existing test execution environments. They have already invested into certain test execution tools. I'm not talking about our tool, but about all the tools that are out there for test execution, right? So the question is, what will happen to them? Do they have to rebuild their existing framework to fit into the Cucumber context? And again, this model-based testing has one benefit, that it's extremely flexible and adapting onto the test execution infrastructures. So the idea here is to have, instead of the question I often get is, do we go now from the model back to the Cucumber? No, I would not say so, because that is basically this underlying error. I can go there, I don't need model-based testing, right? I can just read Gherkin into a Cucumber code and get that out. You can argue you get a bit more kind of for the stubs, but still I think the real power is to enable, for example, scriptless test automation and to reuse the existing execution environments. Okay, and yes, so that's for me the track. And again, here, I'm obviously, no matter where I stand, I'm in the way. Again, the idea here is also, you see the different roles. The business analyst is responsible for the Gherkin here. The tester is basically participating in this model with MBT via the modeling to the test automation directly, right? And then we still have the developer, obviously, also here in the view. And of course, we see still that there may be reasons why you want to go this Cucumber approach, but maybe, engaging the functional testers in this process, this route is a very attractive one. And we also need to understand that wherever we go from here, is completely automatic. So there's no argument saying like, well, only Cucumber allows you to work with Jenkins. Obviously, any other automatic test execution tool can also be executed from Jenkins for that purpose. Or continuous integration systems, let's say it like that. Okay, so then in a nutshell, the kind of benefits that I would say are the core reason why we want to do this. So basically in conventional BDD, or let's say test automation for BDD, we have this automatic conversion into Java or Ruby or other kind of programming languages, whereas in the model-based testing approach, we have the option to go to scriptless test automation. We have the, again, manual coding of test steps versus, the use of existing kind of keyword-driven frameworks, etc., which help to reduce the actual effort to implement something, and again, give the access to the test execution automation to a much wider audience. Then there's an argument about dependency on API technology. So whenever Cucumber gets into these regions where we have more than just user interface interactions, but we include also web services, then it becomes on a code level more difficult, to keep the expertise in the team to work across all of these interfaces, whereas modeling has for a long time already been working above that level of detail. Yes. And the thing is also about documentation. Obviously, as we can generate code stubs, we can also generate documentation, but the thing is here, again, generating documentation output from models, it will always be much more up to date, because the moment we export to test automation, we generate the documentation not in the beginning of the test automation. So that's also one of the advantages of this approach. And whenever we also talk about test documentation, we don't only talk about creating Word documents or creating text files, but we're talking also about uploading test plans to application lifecycle management tools and etc. So this basically is already more or less the end of this presentation. I mean, this presented one of the approaches. Actually, in the next slide, I have another kind of approach that we're looking into. But I think this one is a good one to get everyone started with. Basically, again, we want to draw from the benefits that BDD has achieved something that many others have never achieved in the past, right? The ability to really have, let's say, qualitatively better input to the test specification process from the specification guys. I think this is something that's a wave you need to ride on. I mean, that doesn't come by all the time. So that's what I think it's important to work with this BDD. And then, of course, MBT offering the classic benefits of improving test design, automatic traceability of test coverage and consistency. All of this comes automatically from model-based testing. And again, MBT gives you the ability to leverage your existing infrastructure that you have built up already instead of needing to do radical or necessarily new designs. Yes, and then again, one of the key points for me is I would like, I think one of the things that are important for us people working in test automation is not always to think about how can we make our work better, but how can we make test automation more accessible to the general public, even if they don't have programming experience. And this is at least my constant struggle to find the best solution that allows us to leverage as much as we can test automation. Okay, so I think with that I would like to close it here and ask for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schulz. Now we have time for the Slido questions. We have some questions here. The first, isn't the redundancy in Gherkin means there's a redundancy in the requirements too?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I agree. That can also be the case. But I mean, the cases so far that I've seen is that people have just not thought even between different scenarios about that they have actually been writing about the same thing again. That there's a more effective way of saying it, that they actually have by coincidence recovered the same thing again. And we've been, I don't know, maybe it was just in the talks here on the at lunch, right? We've been talking a lot about we would like to reduce the amount of tests that we execute. Well, everything that's redundant, probably most people would like to skip from the test execution. So that's as much as I would like to say about this. First point, it's true there can be redundancy in the requirements, and that should be flagged properly. But I think my guesstimate, and again, it's just a guess, it would be like 80% is unintentional and 20% is really, quotes, by design redundant. Okay. Okay,
the next question is, I assume building a model has a considerable upfront cost. I have to sell it to the management. What's your advice on it?
So Attila, you just come to me. No, it's just a joke. So, I mean, I don't know if people have understood this. Maybe if I can just go back to the slides. Is it possible that you show the slides one more time?
Can we please go back to the slideshow?
I want to show one slide. Okay. Okay, my presentation's already gone. Okay. But there's this one slide where there's this whole pipeline displayed, right? Where we have these stages, modeling, test design, test execution. And on the left, there was this bubble which had Gherkin in it. For me, MBT has undergone, oh, thank you, perfect. So this is the key slide here, right? So for me, this green stuff, that's really MBT. And the thing is that what has happened over time, I mean, previously MBT really only used to be about this test design. We just generate tests. Then people started to say, Well, okay, it's not good enough for me because, generating tests is just a small piece of what I do. I work with all these ALM systems. I have all this test execution. People started buying this stuff. And now, when we get back now to this question about how can I tell them I want to start modeling, is that a huge thing has been what I would call MBT 3.0, when companies started 2 years ago, and again, it's not only our company, but also others, started to work on reusing existing assets for model construction, right? So nobody, my belief is you should always question when you're looking at a white sheet of paper, why do I have nothing to start out with? It cannot be. You must have some even test automation assets, or you must have some kind of inputs, be that manual tests that for some stuff people have been testing manually, Gherkin from your business analyst, ideally, right? Or even some type of flow charts or business process models. That stuff you don't need to write from scratch. That stuff you should just get out there. And then basically the idea is, the answer to the question is, in using model-based testing today, you should expect that the tools provide for you a service that create models from existing artifacts. Okay, can we now go back to the question? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we have time for one question. What are the disadvantages of the Gherkin?
Yeah, I tried to also highlight that in the entrance part. Again, it is the ease of specification is both a blessing and a curse. So I still think the biggest risk is that we get driven too much into predefined scenarios in what we do. We don't think about the system as a whole anymore so much, but we start getting focused. And there's a terrible risk also that we, as testers, know this actually different, that people start saying, hey, there's these scenarios from the BA, we'll just test that. Because that's what we're being accepted on. The rest, it's not in the Gherkin. We don't need to test it, right? And that's the wrong way of thinking. And that's also a risk, again, that we get from this sticking too much to scenarios. As testers, that's why I want testers to come in this process. They should come in there and start saying, people, think about more scenarios, or at least, provide like test data to these Gherkin scenarios to make them to get a bit more out of them. So I think we as testers can add a lot to Gherkin by helping people to explore the actual system functionality beyond just what is in the spec.